And so there are barriers to moving forward with video. There are, really large, I think, mental barriers as well as really just sort of infrastructural and resource barriers to keep a lot of organizations moving forward. When we sampled the field, they told us that there are really just a handful of major factors that are keeping them from producing more video, or will keep them from producing more video in the next year. Spoiler alert, surprise to nobody, budget is number one within that. There's a perception that video is extremely expensive to produce, and we're actually going to sort of break that myth and talk a little bit about the kind of the range of production techniques and their costs today on our webinar. Training is another key factor. Folks felt that they just had too much of a gap between understanding how to use video tools and understanding video principles and actually what they had in-house. And then, of course, in-house staff and talent. Folks felt that they did not have employees scoped or prepared to take on video responsibilities. And naturally, as we see all too often in our field silos, people we talk to across nonprofits felt that they had just issues organizationally where it wasn't totally clear whose department was really going to take up the mantle of being video producers and who was going to have input and purview over that between, let's say, development and communications and advocacy silos within the organization. And then finally, a large barrier to moving forward was proof of impact, understanding the return on their investment for video and having a fear of moving forward because they could not measure actually how video moved the needle for their issue or for their initiative or what have you. So we want to actually talk about production today. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Stacy in just a minute, and she's going to take it from here through most of our presentation. But we want to unpack some of these findings first, and then we're going to relate how those really associate with production. And really, we're going to talk about, I think, the top three of these factors that are preventing folks from moving forward here today. So we're going to talk about production, how that relates to budget, how that relates to training, and sort of what are the foundational things your staff needs to know to do more with video, and then of course how to foster more of a video savvy culture, both professionally and in terms of individuals within your team. So we'll go ahead and pass it to Stacy, and we'll be getting started with her right now.
All right, hi everyone. Thanks again for coming out to the webinar. Before I move forward to the next slide, I just want to say a couple of things in terms of my goals and objectives for this. Like Nasser said, most importantly, we're just going to be going over the process of what it takes to make a video from start to finish. No matter if you're producing a video in-house or out-of-house with another production company, it's really important to understand the steps and what it takes to make a successful video. And then secondly, I want to give you a few tips to walk away with to be able to improve your in-house skills. Video used to be something that was only for a select few people in Hollywood, and with the iPhone and Androids and iPads and everything that's available for us now, it really is for everyone. So that's kind of the two priorities today, and at the end I'm hoping to have time to take a few questions. So, and this also being said, we're going to cover a lot. I went to film school for 4 years, and I've been working in film for 8 years now, and I'm still learning. And so it's, a patient process, and just want to keep reiterating that throughout the entire presentation. So the first thing we want to talk about, and what really relates to the report, is keys to video success. We know sometimes we'll watch a video and it will move us, it will make us cry, it will make us laugh, but that's only really good if it works for your organization or if it looks pretty. So what we found most valuable for nonprofits is that video is only good as if it creates an impact for you and works for your organization. So make sure your video has a clear and measurable goal, that you're producing engaging content, that you're using authentic storytelling, and that your videos and what your organization is producing is consistent. So we'll start with every video needs a goal, a clear, attainable goal, and a way to measure it through success. So for example, a lot of times we'll work with clients and they'll say, oh, we want to make this video about the impact of global warming. We'll just use that as an example. It's like, that's great. Well, how do you know if you're changing people's beliefs in global warming? And is it just the amount of YouTube views? Is that really enough awareness? Or do you want to actually be capturing data so you can go back and measure those, go back and contact those people later and ask them to take a tangible action like sign a petition or donate? So really putting video into your engagement cycle that you probably already have within your own internal communications plan. So the first thing that we always ask our clients, or if we're doing a project internally, are these 4 questions. The first question is, why are you making the video? What are you trying to say? A lot of times we'll get a page document back of 20 things that an organization wants to communicate within a video, and it's our job to go back to them and say, well, hold on, that's a lot of information. What are the 3 main points, or the 1 point you want people to take away? Again, video is great at storytelling and creating an emotional hook. It's also good for information, but your audience can only retain so much information, and you want to use that video to hook them in to go find out more if they're really engaged in the subject. Again, and then who is your audience? It's so easy to say our audience is everyone, or our audience is female 20 to 85, and the broader your audience is, the less likely of a return on your investment you will have. It's best to have a pinpointed audience so your video resonates with them. And then most importantly, what do you want your audience to do? Back to that example again, do you just want them to watch the video and like it, or do you want them to do something greater like make a donation or sign a petition? You know, and this note here at the bottom, it says, you have their attention, don't waste it. And that's so, so true. So moving on, we're going to start getting into the nitty-gritty of producing video now. So a lot of times, and one myth that's often out there is that making a video is all about the filming, what camera you have and what you're doing in the moment. But that's actually not true. Producing a video, 40% of it is in finding the story and your pre-production work, which I'll explain a little bit later. 10% of it is the production part, which is when you actually go in the field with the camera. And then 50% of it is post-production and distribution. So, you know, there's a lot of paperwork and a lot of preparation that goes into producing a video. On average, for a 1 minute video, I will say 1 to 3 minute video, depending on your approach, it takes about 10 weeks start to finish. You know, and this isn't, I'm not talking about videos here that are, you have an event, you're filming a speaker, you're filming it on your iPhone, and then you're going to upload it right away to your YouTube page for your constituents to see. I'm talking more about like a PSA, a documentary, a motion graphics video. Okay, so that being said, what does a producer really do? This is a very old meme that we're bringing back out because I think it captures my job really well. You can take a minute to look at it, but what do I really do? I herd cats. And it's true, and I don't mean that from the client side. I mean that from a producer is in charge of working with a team of people and making sure the job gets done. I would also add another picture here that shows a paper pusher, because so much of the work I do deals with filling out forms, contacting people, making phone calls, making sure everything we need is in place for that 10% day of production. And so unfortunately, a producer is not as glamorous as most people paint it to be. The most important job of a producer, which you could be internally if you're making your video in-house, or externally if you're working with a production company and producing the video with them, is your job is to plan, 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 and do more planning. The more you plan, the stronger your video will be. The first place to start, and I should actually take a step back to say that we're moving in a progressive cycle here through steps to video making, but a lot of these steps intertwine with each other. So these are suggested places to start, but of course, if you have a strict deadline and you don't have your story left yet and your deadline's driving your story, you might take a different approach. But our approach and our recommended approach is to start by finding your story. You know, look around you. What makes you lean forward? What's engaging? Is it really, you know, your president talking about the 20 years of your organization and all the impacts you've had, or is the story really the woman that you helped find a house. Her house burnt down. It was your job to put her in a housing placement and hear from her mouth about her situation. So a lot of time goes into finding stories. A lot of times I think a barrier is we are scared to ask people if they'll participate in a video, and we feel like we're violating someone's privacy, when in actuality most people want to share their stories. Here are some tips for the art of storytelling. Our number one thing that we tell everyone all the time is keep it simple. One message or theme. What are you trying to say? What's the one thing you want your audience to walk away with? Again, make it about your subjects. Make it about your donors, your volunteers, the people you're helping on the ground, someone who's actually had impact from your organization. And then that person can draw an emotional connection for you. A lot of times, especially if you're doing a video for an event, it's really easy to want to talk about all the policy pieces that you might want to convey to your donors, but in actuality, you're going to have someone up on stage talking about that in a minute, so why not use the video as an opportunity to connect them to someone that you've actually helped, or someone who's saying, I need help. This organization needs funding so I can get help, and there are many Americans out there like me. And let your narrative bring these issues to life, which is what I just went through. So once you find your story, simple like that, right? We go into what's called a creative brief. Every project we work on, we make a creative brief. And it's a checklist. It's paperwork. We write down what's our delivery date. From there, we can build our timeline backwards. Who's our audience? Again, is it everyone? No. We need to make a profile of who those people are. What are the key messages we're trying to convey? And then we always highlight what is the number one we're trying to convey. The call to action, what do we want people to do? We should be talking about that in the pre-production stage, not when the video is done and it's like, oh yeah, maybe we should ask people to sign a petition. No, up front we know. We want people to walk away from this video feeling X and doing Y. The tone of the video. Is it somber and sad? Is it happy? Is it celebratory? Is it to get people outraged and angered? All of that's going to drive your creative process. And then we like to do, this is the fun part, examples of styles of videos that inspire us or that are similar to what we're trying to produce. And it doesn't always have to be videos. Sometimes we'll look at artwork and other objects. This step here, the creative brief, if you work within an organization where you have a lot of cooks in the kitchen, we highly recommend you do this and circulate it within your team and say, we need sign off on this creative brief before we move forward with anything. Because then halfway through the video process, when you've already spent 30 to 40 hours working on it and someone on your team says, that's not the message I thought we were going to say, you can go back to that creative brief and pull it up and say, well, actually, we all signed off on this piece of paper, and this is what we said we were going to do, and you approved it. So it gives you a little bit of leverage later on in the video process. So again, producing and making video lots of times is all about just a series of decisions because there's always things that go wrong. But so decision time, and these decisions will also help you decide what kind of video you can make. So the first one is, what's your budget? So the first thing I would say is don't freak out. There's always a way to work around something you have. I like to think about budget in two ways, especially for nonprofits. There's your annual budget. How much do you have to spend on video in general throughout the year? And then there's the budget for the actual production. So if you know you need to make one marquee video that's going to be shown at a luncheon or a dinner, or is going to be for a big fundraising push or a big campaign to get petition signatures, you might want to put more money into that video so you can have a higher production value. But thank you videos from your president or from staff members or whoever, or something that's just like a quick little update on this is what's going on in our organization, that can probably have a lower budget, and you can do that in-house. So, just don't plan for explosions because those are expensive and you have to get city permits. That was a joke. Okay. So another decision that you have to make is who will make your video? Again, is it internal? And if you're making the video internal, who has the skill? Who has the time? Who wants to learn? Because it's a big learning investment. If you're outsourcing it to a company like C3 or an independent producer, who recommends them, what results do they get, knowing how to interview those people and make sure they're a firm you want to work with. And then there's always collaboration to look at as well. Can someone shoot? Can someone edit? Can we leverage a volunteer who's a great photographer? Can we ask someone we know who has a helicopter to take us up in the air so we can get that aerial shot? All those things. I'm going to pick up the pace here. I just want to give let everybody know I talk very fast. And if you need me to slow down, please write it in the chat window because I just want to watch the clock and we have a lot to get through. Okay. Another decision you have to make is what's your video style? Well, your video style is really determined on what kind of message you're trying to convey, what your budget is, and the resources you have to work with. So most commonly, a lot of nonprofits will go the documentary style route. This example is of Invisible People, which you can find highlighted in the reports. But basically, documentary style is what we all know. You pick up a camera, you go in the field, and you film real stories. Just because it's documentary style doesn't mean there isn't pre-production. The best documentaries have huge pre-production budgets tied to them. There's a lot of time researching characters who convey the right message, getting to the locations, dealing with filming in environments that always aren't that great or comfortable. This photo here of Mark, he's in the underground tunnels of Las Vegas. So getting down there, finding the person to take him down there, dealing with those conditions, and making sure he has the right gear that will provide enough light is a lot of work. Narrative is another option we see a lot. A lot of PSAs are narratives as well. A narrative is just like a Hollywood story. I think we all know what a narrative is. But I also want to talk about alternative ways to approaching narratives that can help you with a limited scope and budget. If you have footage that your organization has already shot, you can look at it and script around it and say, how can we take these images and put a story together out of them? So using a voiceover or fun music like the Rainforest Alliance did. This is the Rainforest Alliance, right? Yeah. Yeah, the Rainforest Alliance did. They went through and said, we have these photos and look at these cool shots, and we can tell a story out of them. Moving on to direct appeal. This is not a nonprofit spot, but it's just something to lighten the mood. This is Elizabeth Banks talking about how she gets great skin, and it's by people throwing pies in her face. But the same thing, having your president do a direct address to camera is another option to go about conveying a message really quickly. It's not the most interesting and engaging, but it's great for your base of supporters who want to check in and want to know what's going on. And then last but not least, motion graphics and animation. We've seen a huge influx in this in the past 2 years in the nonprofit world. Tons and tons and tons of organizations using motion graphics. Why? Because it's a great way to convey a very hard message in complicated situations. This is an image from the story of Stuff, which is great. Annie Leonard is the narrator for it, and it's all about where does stuff come from and where does it go. And it's a subject matter that could be, you know, honestly quite boring if you had 3 experts on screen talking about it, but with the clever animation and the great narration and the really smart copy, it comes together well, and it drew a huge movement and was very successful online. So, yeah, and the same thing with infographics. It can break down complicated numbers and scenarios. There was a popular one that was circulating all about, oh my gosh, there's been so many of them, like the girl effect. It's an infographic in some way where it tells the story of if you support one girl, she can change the world, is one thing we've all seen. And what's nice about an infographic in video form versus on paper is that you can lead your viewer from one place to another instead of them getting overwhelmed and looking at the whole sheet of paper, and use a narration to go with it and music to help evoke a mood. So after you determine what your style is, there's more paperwork to be done in your pre-production. No matter what style you're doing out of those, you always have to come up with a concept. If you're doing a documentary, what are the themes around it? Are the themes freedom or homelessness, etc.? A script or an outline. Most documentaries, you do an outline of what you're hoping to capture up front. Again, it's not just picking up a camera and going and film. You can do it, but I don't recommend it. Script for your narrative or your motion graphics or your direct appeal. casting. Casting applies for narrative and documentary, again, finding those real subjects that exist, doing pre-interviews on the phone with them, finding out if they're articulate, finding out if they can really tell the story you think they have in a compelling way. I can't tell you how many times we've worked on projects where it's like, we have this guy in our organization, he has the best story ever. When you hear him talk, he moves you to tears. And then we pick up the phone and we talk to him, and it's like, from my perspective, I'm an outsider from your organization. He didn't move me to tears, and he wasn't very articulate. And I think someone in your organization is really close with him, and his family has helped him, but that's not coming through on film. So we need to find someone else. Style boards, I'll show an example of that in a minute, but again, what do you want your video to look like? Scheduling, when are you going to conduct those interviews? When are you going to go film? Are you going to go look at the locations in advance? When's production happening, and then also scheduling post-production. Securing your locations and crew is really important, and then create a shot list for your B-roll, which are the images that you gather to help support your story. So this is just a really quick example of a style look and feel board where we drew off of a client's color palette. This is actually for the Donors Forum. They're located in Chicago. And we found some animation that we liked. And the end product ended up incorporating a lot of this type of imagery, but was unique for them. Okay, so that's pre-production. That's 40% of our project right there. So now we're ready to go into the next 10%, which is production. Elements of production. What goes into production? It's just like cooking. You need your equipment, you need technical knowledge, you need the ability to tell a story visually, and you need to be organized. Organization is key because things like releases and shooting signs, where you're going to go get lunch for all the people who are helping you, you want to have all that figured out in advance. And there's this note down here that says, the most important thing is the story you tell, not the tools you tell it with. There are some things that are obsolete, but I do want to say, if you have the best camera in the world, you're not going to get the best footage unless you know how to actually use it. If you have the best story in the world, but you have a camera that's 50 years old, that probably won't work for you either. So it's a balance of these tools and knowing how all of them work to get the story that you're trying to tell. So quickly, what kind of equipment do you need? A camera. If you have an iPhone, you have a camera. You might want to get a camera for your office just so not everybody's using your iPhone and running the battery down and you miss that call. Once you start producing more video in-house, we really recommend that you have audio that's separate from the microphone on the camera because it gives you more control of what you can hear. Audio is so important. We'll talk about that later. Tripod, a support system. I can't tell you how many times where I see a great direct appeal video from a nonprofit where the person who's talking is really passionate about supporting the organization, but they film it without a tripod, so the whole thing's shaky and it's hard to watch and it kind of feels like you're on a roller coaster. Lighting, again, not all nonprofits need lighting, but if you have the ability, you should get some lighting gear that helps you. There's a lot of affordable options out there now, unlike there used to be. And storage. With the age of digital media, video files are really large, and they should not live on your computer, but on a hard drive that everybody can access and borrow. And you should have a backup plan as well. And so that's something we like to think about in the production stage as well, because if you're shooting on a SD card, how many cards do you need that day, and making sure you have them. And if you only have one of them, you have a backup plan for dumping that media onto a hard drive. One practical thing that I thought would be nice to talk about today is shooting interviews, since more than likely that's what people will be doing in-house. When you conduct an interview, always use a tripod. Always pay attention to the sound and make sure you're interviewing in a quiet room. Again, the best story and the best looking interview no one could pay attention to if the sound is terrible. If you hear someone slamming a door, if there's noise, people talking in the background, if there's an airplane flying overhead, all those things pick up and are very distracting to your story. I've gone to great lengths where I've interviewed someone in their kitchen and their refrigerator was noisy. I could hear the hum, so I asked them to turn their refrigerator off. I went behind the refrigerator and unplugged it. I put my car keys in the refrigerator so I wouldn't forget to turn it back on. I couldn't leave without turning the refrigerator back on. So it's amazing how much noise a room produces. A great exercise when we get off the webinar is to turn your or close your eyes and sit in silence for a minute and count all the noises you hear. Ask your subject to answer questions, again, if they don't feel comfortable. And the same thing is ask them to answer the question in a complete statement. So if I were to say, if you were to ask me, what's your name, and I just said Stacy, that's going to be hard to edit together. So what's your name? My name is Stacy, and I'm a producer. And always stick to your schedule. If you think your interview is only going to take 30 minutes, especially if you're interviewing someone high up in your organization, we all want to be respectful of people's time. Setting up for your interview before it takes place. Again, finding a location that's quiet. Choosing your frame. We'll be looking at examples of all of these. Making sure you have good lighting. Set your white balance, focus, and iris. Almost all cameras have this functionality. Even on your iPhone, you can set your white balance. Check your audio levels before your subject shows up. Have someone sit in a chair or yourself sit in a chair and leave the camera where it's going to be on the tripod and say what you ate for breakfast and play it back and make sure it sounds okay. Make sure you get your subject to sign a release form and have everybody turn their phones off, which is amazing how sometimes we forget that. So here are some examples of good and bad framing that I think are just some tips that can really help you with your videos internally. As you can see here in the back, it says no depth. There's a girl in a green shirt. We have her flat against the wall and she's looking to the side. And some depth, we brought the chair away from the wall and angled her a little bit, so behind her shoulder you get a little bit of a shadow and you see a little bit more of the room back there. Also, the white railing in the some depth version is out of like a soft focus, so we're looking more at her face, versus in the no depth one, it's really prominent and not that great to look at, and I'm not sure why I want to look at the railing. To our right, we have a picture here of this gentleman named Claude. A medium close-up on him is normally the shot size you want to get during an interview. You can see he's framed to the right and he's looking off to the left, so there's nice headroom there. And then below is the close-up shot, which matches the same framing. A word of advice about using close-ups in interviews: it's so easy when someone shares a personal story to want to zoom right into their face. But think about when you have a conversation with someone. If you were really looking that close to them, it would be really uncomfortable and feel like an invasion of privacy. So we should only be on close-ups when it's really necessary. And if you're going to zoom in while someone's talking, wait till they're done with their sentence and then zoom in. So if you need to cut around it in post, you have the option. And then below are just some different scenarios. If you want to do an interview with someone standing up, there's a wide shot where you see their whole body in frame, a medium shot, and then one that's a bad example of don't cut people off at joints and hands. It looks weird. It's uncomfortable with your own eye. You don't frame people like that. Why can't I move to the next slide? Sorry. So lighting with sunlight, a lot of times when we don't have access to lighting, we'll just use a window to help us. It's very tempting, especially if you're shooting downtown, to want to see the beautiful skyline or in the mountains. But what happens when you put a light source behind somebody is that they become silhouetted and it looks like you're doing an interrogation interview. So one way to use window light is have it work for you. Turn the subject around. If you look at the right frame, the sunlight is hitting his face. He has nice blue eyes. The frame isn't the most beautiful frame in the world, and it's a little cluttered. If we had some time, we could have moved some things around. But it's way better to see his face than to see what's outside, because, again, what's the most important thing you want to be seeing? One term you'll hear a lot in filmmaking is called B-roll, and that term comes from the idea that you shoot footage that helps supplement your interviews. So your interviews or your main subject is your A-roll, and then your B-roll fills in. I like to think of B-roll as A-roll, not to confuse anybody, because what's great about video is that you want to see what's happening. You can go into someone's life and be with them and observe. When someone's just sitting there and telling a story and you see a talking head, it's not engaging. What makes documentaries good and narratives good are images that take you and move you places and take you somewhere you want to go. So I encourage you to go and watch 3 or 4 short 3-minute nonprofit videos and look at the ones and think about why you like them. And most of them is probably because you related to the B-roll and you were able to be there. So, and B-roll isn't just getting one shot of an exterior of a building and you're like, oh, they're talking about the school, we'll cut to this image. It's really using images to create a scene together and put someone in the space because we can't film everything at once. So these are some shots to think about when you're going out and capturing B-roll, to think about it in a new way. So these images here are from a video that was done for the Ounce of Prevention at one of their educare centers in Chicago. So if you look at the top left-hand corner, there's an establishing wide shot of the school that we captured. In the middle, there's a shot of a little girl. She's listening. It's just a close-up on her listening to a teacher read. To the right of that, there's an action medium shot where in the video footage, the teacher is actually reading the book aloud. She's looking around, surveying the students. We see some of the students behind her. The one kid kind of looks tired. Below them, there's a close-up of the teacher reading that we can cut to. And then all the way to the left is what's called a cutaway, something in the room that lets us know where we're at in the environment that isn't of people or of our subjects. So if you're filming in a hospital, it could be like the call board, or it could be the sign that says ER, or it could be someone holding hands with their loved ones because it's an intense situation, but you don't see their face. All of those things are considered cutaways. And again, it would be so easy to just say, oh, I'm making a video about a classroom. I'm going to go in and film a wide shot and pan around it, and that's my B-roll. But good storytelling, you gather a lot of B-roll. Some tips for shooting usable B-roll. Hold each shot steady for 10 seconds. I know that sounds excessive, but it's true. By the time you actually stabilize your image and figure out what your framing is, your 10 seconds is almost up, so you need to hold it for 10 seconds and post. It's important because if you're trying to cover someone talking for 5 seconds, you have all that footage. If filming is handheld, if you're filming handheld, make sure to support yourself. I like to create what's called the human tripod, which is if you work out the idea that you put your feet to the side of you, hip width distance apart, and bend your knees a little bit and stabilize yourself instead of filming with your feet close together and being unstable. If you have a tripod, again, use it. Pan, tilt, everything. We recommend avoid using the zoom function because what happens when you zoom, especially if you're using handheld footage, is the image starts to become shaky. If your hand's shaky at all, it magnifies that. Your image can start to get grainy. You can start to lose focus. If you really want to go into something, walk up to the person and film. It's fine. Next. Capturing clean audio. I'm going to stress this again. Audio matters more than visuals. Get your microphone as close to your audio source as possible. Some audio gear that we use and that we've recommended to nonprofits in the past to purchase are lavalier microphones. Those are the microphones that clip onto your shirt that are really small and you can hide. That picks up the audio of the person that's talking directly. A shotgun microphone is a microphone you usually see attached to a camera or someone holding, and that gets directional sound. So if you're in a busy airport and you don't want to get everyone talking around you, you wouldn't want to use the onboard microphone because it's going to pick up all the sound. The shotgun will help you figure out, I want to get these 2 people talking over there, and I can get that audio. It's a little complicated. I wish we had the time to go into it, but these are things you can research on your own. And a boom operator is that guy you see standing with a stick over his head and a little fuzzy microphone ball at the end. And that's if you have the budget for a larger crew. It's great to have someone who can really get in there and get the sound that you need. But easy things you can do: find a quiet place, don't film by traffic, flight paths, fire stations. Again, if the AC is really loud or the refrigerator, turn it off. So we're going to jump into post-production here. Post-production is, I think we said 50% of your work, and also distribution. The post-production part of that is probably more in the 30 to 40%. The more you film, the longer your post-production process will be, and this is why pre-production is so important, because the more defined you can be about the story you're trying to tell up front, the easier of time you will have in post-production. Even in narratives, though, if you're filming off of a script and you have a shot list of everything you want to get, and you're filming a kid going to the grocery store and buying a milk, and then there's a tagline at the end saying, this milk was treated with hormones, stay away and don't buy it. You could still run into things that you captured that you weren't expecting and can cause you troubles in post-production. So just always prep for post-production time. The screen grab here is from Final Cut Pro, and it shows just our timeline and viewer windows, and is just a glimpse into what an editor's tool palette looks like. Post-production, where the story comes together and really gets told. The way I like to think about editing is like sculpting. A lot of times I feel when I talk to organizations and consults around the editing process, they say, there's just so much to work with, and I'm trying to put all these pieces together. And I think that is the wrong way of thinking about it. It's not what are you putting together, it's what are you taking away. Because if you have a full day of filming, that's, let's say it's 4 to 5 hours of footage, you have to look through all of it, and you start taking things away. So you're starting with a block of clay, and you're hammering away at it to find what that final image will look like, or that final story. Post-production is both creative in the way that you tell the story, and it's also technical, so there's a big learning curve here. And again, the most important thing is the story you tell, not the tools to tell it with. A lot of times people say, what software do you prefer? C3, we use Adobe Premiere and Final Cut, but that's not to say Avid's great, it's just not what we use. We didn't upgrade to the new Final Cut because it's not compatible to all the things we want to be doing, so that's why we switched to Premiere. Things like Windows Movie Maker and iMovie are great starting places, but I think the more you get involved in the editing process, you'll realize that those tools will only get you so far. But if that's the budget you have to work within, you can definitely make it happen. It's really important to be organized in post-production. It's really the cornerstone of post-production, just like if anyone has experience with building websites or building even PowerPoint presentations that reference external links, or working in InDesign. Editing is the same way. It's looking for files on your desktop, or on your computer, which should really be on your external hard drive. So you have to be organized in where your elements go. So when you go into your edit file and it says file not found, it won't be an issue, and you won't have to spend 20 hours looking for the file. Well, that was an exaggeration, probably like 20 minutes. But and just know what you're working with. So if if you're missing it, you can find it. Some tips for organization: use files and folders. Whoops, go back. Use files and folders. Right here it says early morning, food distribution, interviews, Sheldon's interviews, trucks and unloading. So it's easy to find what everything is. And I'm consistent in my naming. So if I'm talking about a truck, this is in reference to, we filmed a produce mobile here in Chicago. I started with the name truck and didn't say departing truck, and then truck pulling in, and then that way in the searching capability it's easier. I know it kind of sounds like minutia, but it really will make your editing process so much faster. So we're going to talk about the post-production process here, just like we've been talking about process everywhere else. The first place that you have to start with a rough cut with your edit is with a rough cut or a paper edit. Basically, this is your first attempt at the sculpture, the first things you're going to be chipping away. To help you get here, if you're doing a documentary, recommend producing transcripts to find where people are speaking and what they're saying easier. Normally, if I'm producing a minute video, my first assembly or string out of just all the selects that I have will be 8 minutes long, which is a lot. But when you think about from 5 hours of material, that's pretty good. So the rough cut is really that first pass of, is the story coming together? Do we have the right people speaking in place? How are we going to cover these jump cuts if we leave them? But it's really not polished at all. Think of, the first, when you're doing a website, the first layout of what that site's going to look like when you have the boxes that say, like, button here that clicks to fundraising. It's that same idea. And then after your content is locked down, we go into what's called a fine cut, where you can start thinking about more of the fun elements of music and titles and logo and voiceover, what kind of transitions you're going to be using, etc. And then from your fine cut, it goes into the final cut. A question I get all the time is, when should we be showing edits internally or externally to people for feedback? Even though rough cuts can sometimes be hard to show because all the finishing details aren't there, such as music's often temp holder, or there's just random jump cuts that haven't been covered with B-roll yet, it's really important that anyone who has say on content in your organization looks at the rough cut. Because if you spend all that time polishing everything and making it look pretty and they're not happy with it, you have to go back and do it all over again. Again, it seems simple, but it's easy to want to jump into the fun stuff when you should really be focusing on the storytelling part first. So that's the very short version of Video 101 and process. Again, these tips are to help you when you're working with a vendor, understand what they're going through in the process and how to feedback, and then also to learn a little bit more about how you can implement video process into your own organization. Successful video production is all about planning, more planning and paperwork. And adhering to that process and sticking to it just like you would with anything else in your organization. Always follow your creative brief and sign off on your goals up front, so when you're in the editing process and you show someone a final cut, they don't say, wow, that's not the video I thought we were making. We want to avoid that at all costs. Don't let equipment or infrastructure hold you back. Yes, it can be frustrating. I can admit that. Well, we have to work within budgets too, and there's always time where I wish I had just that one extra resource to really do the one thing I want to do. And that's when I have to step back and say, Stacy, you know what? Think creatively about it. How else can we go about it and make this happen and still meet our goals? Because at the end of the day, it's all about the goals. Focus on telling the right story, spending that time up front for that right subject. Keep your eye on emotion, identification, and aspiration. Always be prepared. And this last one is practice makes perfect. From all aspects of film production, from script writing to going in the field and filming yourself to quality control and post-production, practice, practice, practice. I can't tell you how much we practice here, our interns, how much practice they get at school. The more practice you have, the better you'll be. And so we're going to open it up to questions, but before that, just to talk a little bit about our next upcoming webinar. So now that we've made a video in an hour, we're going to talk about how you distribute that video and get users engaged online, because again, the video is all about being a tool of engagement to get people to take action for your cause. So I'm going to turn the phone back over to Nasser, and he's going to read some of the questions.
Thanks, Stacy. Great presentation, and thanks to everyone who's joined us here today. We've got some great questions from the group. Just wanted to quickly, recap what Stacy said. By all means, we encourage you to join our final webinar this same time next week. We will be discussing sort of the final step in the video production continuum, which is, of course, distribution and actually putting your video to use and putting it out into the world, which is certainly a hot topic. So we look forward to you guys joining us for that. I wouldn't be doing my job without just quickly mentioning that if you have video needs and want to learn more about how you might up your game within your organization via video, or learn more about what C3 provides in that area, by all means, let us know, and you can just email Stacy for that. So without further hold up, I'm going to go ahead and jump into our questions, and we've got a great list of them today. I'm just going to jump into some of the first ones that we've gotten earlier on. Great, great. I have a question here from Kate. This is a great one. Kate asks, do you have a good example of how to collect personal data via video, i.e. views are good enough, or views aren't good enough, we need info about the viewers to follow up. What's the best way to do this? Honestly, I would say there's a couple ways to do that, Kate, but I would start with YouTube Analytics. Generally speaking, the information you're going to get from the back end of your YouTube, even though it's aggregated, is terrific. You're going to be able to pull out geography based on their Google profiles, a certain amount of age, demographic, gender breakdown as well, to give you a better sense of just the audience characteristics of the people actually watching your video content. I'm going to just kind of jump into the next question. Stacy actually had a follow-up for that. You can actually find that just in the back end of your channel when you're logging in. I'm going to pass this next question to Stacy. This is a great one. Jeremy asks, give us a sense of budget for animations, the moving infographic style, and maybe a couple of references to similar videos.
Thanks, Jeremy. Budget is a huge range for animation. It really depends on the complex type of animation you're doing, or the complexity of the animation, excuse me. So let's say you wanted to do something where you weren't creating your own creative, so you didn't have an illustrator making characters that are unique for you or images that are unique for you, but instead going to somewhere like iStock or Shutterstock and downloading their vector-based images. They always have the bathroom person or whatever image to use, and a bunch of icons. And length is also a determining factor in cost. Something that's 30 seconds versus 3 minutes is a huge difference. Sometimes animation, especially infographic style, there isn't a lot of movement in the element itself. But a lot of voiceover that goes with an element that just might gradually grow and then zip off screen. And then on the higher end of things, when you work with an animation, if you think of something that's more hand-drawn or traditional-based or 3D, you work with an illustrator or a team of illustrators to come up with what those characters look like, how they're going to walk. If you're moving legs versus arms, is a lot more time-consuming. And there's a lot more rounds of review and something like that because all the art is created from scratch. So you could do, if you're working with an in-house designer and they're building all your graphics and it's a 30-second animation and very simplistic, that could be something between $5,000 and $10,000. But if you're looking for something that's 3 minutes and 3D animation, that can be anywhere from 30 to infinity. It depends on how far you want to take it. So it's really what you're trying to achieve and accomplish and the best way of doing it. Some examples of motion graphics videos I really like are the Girl Effect is great typography video. That's a very simple animation. A lot of planning, I'm sure, went into that. C3 produced one for the Environmental Defense Fund, all about how to ship goods better and highlight intermodal transportation, which is a fun project where we created a lot of the assets from scratch, but you'll notice there's not a whole lot of movement in them. And then another one would be, trying to think, the Sierra Club Beyond Oil. They have a new animation out that's great that shows the life cycle of oil, and it's a really nice piece.
I'm just looking, I'm going to post that.
Yeah, and Nasser's going to post those links onto the question section. So we'll take another question. Another way to see great animation videos and examples is if you go to the Daily Do-Gooder, which is the service that highlights a nonprofit video a day. You can actually search by animation or motion graphics, and it will come up with about 25 different varieties and see some of the unique things that nonprofits are doing.
All right, terrific. I'm going to move on to our next question, and I'll be posting a couple more of those motion graphics examples to the chat window that Stacy mentioned. Our next question is from AP, and this is a pretty specific one and a terrific question. AP asks, or rather he makes note, that audio compression can often be a most important audio function during the shoot, if not during post. His question for Stacy is, what tends to be the favored compression ratio for, say, interview-based work? Stacy, do you want to jump onto that?
I think I need a little more clarification on that. Are you asking what decibels am I working at, or are you? Oh, you can't answer me because it's a type in fact. What would be great is actually my Nasser will post my email, and you can email me directly because I have some questions about gear and whatever you're working with. That's a very specific question that I can't answer at the moment.
Okay, the next question is a clarification from Mikhail, and Mikhail asks, is your paper edit an actual written excerpt or excerpts from transcripts that are woven together?
Great question, Mikhail. I did skip over that. A paper edit is exactly what you said it is when you take the transcripts and you pull selects of what you like and string them together in an order that you think might work on screen. Paper edits are great because it helps you sort through content quickly, and then putting them out into assembly before you actually edit and watching them is very important, because what you read on paper often is not how it looks in the video. People don't say it with the intonation that you hope they said it with. You might be like, this is the best line ever. She's talking about how sad she is. But then when you watch her on screen, she's actually smiling because she feels uncomfortable. So it's a good way to weed through content and then help you take that. When you have a paper edit, that's really the 8 minutes I'm talking about, and then get it down to the 1 or 2 minutes when you see them on screen, and start to realize also what's really repetitive.
Thanks, Stacy. Terry has two questions, and I think they're somewhat interwoven actually in theme. First, she asks, what are some strategies for narrowing focus on audience? Management seems to have a hard time moving beyond everyone. Terry, we feel you. Her second question is, what if the goal of a video is because the CEO wants to make it? What are some suggestions on how to approach that? I know for a fact, Terry, that Stacy and I have some strong opinions, and more or less they're on the same page, but have nuances all their own. So I'm going to take actually a pass at both of your questions, and I'm going to pass it to Stacy to add her 2 cents as well. You know, this is something that we counsel clients on a regular basis. Really, I would say half of the projects that we start with clients, this is something where we need to come to consensus and have sometimes hard conversations with people up front about really what are the aims of their video, what is this project trying to do, and what is the impact of measurement that we're putting on this in the back end to actually see if it's if it's done anything, and if it's actually created some sort of return on investment or return on engagement with constituents. What I would say for your first question, what are some strategies for narrowing the focus on audience, is to remind your maybe higher ups, your stakeholders in the project that for the most part, professionally produced content, whether that be from brands or other nonprofits, has a fairly narrow focus on who it's trying to reach. I would look to examples of advocacy videos, fundraising videos out in the field, and generally those are speaking to specific individuals. They're creating a connection with individuals. We often hold up Charity Water as an example of an organization that really understands this insight and puts it to good use. Charity Water really, they think of video, especially in terms of fundraising or stewardship, as having a place kind of through the engagement life cycle. They don't just use video to make an ask, they also use video to show what they're doing in the field at a program level, and also to actually re-engage their donors. So they have something called the September campaign that they did, I think, a year or two ago, where they were actually making videos, maybe 100 or so videos, to thank individual donors specifically. It doesn't really get much more narrow in terms of audience than that. But those videos, even if you're not a donor, even if you're watching them from sort of outside of that initial group, they're incredibly moving, and they're incredibly personalized, and they are incredibly narrowly focused, obviously, but still incredibly moving. And I would say, think about the specific individuals that you're trying to pinpoint, and do your best to really write your video content for them. Terry's second question, and frankly, this could be a webinar in and of itself. I just want to remind everyone, it's what if the goal of a video is because the CEO wants to make it? Suggestions for how to approach. Terry, I think the best way to sort of maybe put the brakes on that, or at least be more thoughtful about where you're investing resources vis-a-vis video, would be to consider the measurement, the metric, and really pose back to your CEO, how is this video going to measure success? What are the, there's a difference between metrics and measurement, but I would try to answer both. I would say at the very narrow level, what is success? What is a successful outcome? Something that justifies the ROI look to you, will look like to you. How many views is that? How much engagement with the video, reshare via social media, etc. Is correct, and then beyond that, what is the perceived sort of impact this video is having, and do we feel like we can actually realistically make that happen based on this work? There's a lot more focus on this same question in the IntoFocus report. Terry, if you haven't done so already, I definitely recommend downloading it at c3.com/IntoFocus and giving it a read. There's a great section where we worked with Beth Cantor to discuss sort of the difference between metrics and measurement in video, and actually how to really, what questions to ask yourself at the beginning of a video engagement. I'm going to open it up to Stacy because I know she has a couple of thoughts on this as well, and then we'll quickly move on to the next question.
Yeah, before I go in there, I do just want to acknowledge that it is a little past 2. We'll take a couple more questions if people want to take on the line, but also feel free to drop off if you have another meeting. In terms of the second question and getting organizational buy-in or making a video just because one other person thinks it's a good idea, I think it's also smart to come in with a solution of, it looks like you have some funds set aside for this. What about if we take this video and we do an approach that will really resonate with our audience and drive results, and set up what that metric is and hope to meet it. Make one that you think is realistic and attainable and go beyond it. But the more proactive you can be about spinning the video in a way that would be more productive, the better.
Great, thanks, Stacy. The next question comes from Adva, and she asks, for animated video, do you recommend a different process than live action when it comes to outlining or scripting the story? Great question. And I'm just going to repeat that question one more time, since I think I was a little fast with my read back. Adva asks, for animated video, do you recommend a different process than live action when it comes to outlining or scripting your story?
Absolutely. In animation, there is another step in there. Instead of doing the paper edit and post-production, we add an element into the pre-production part, which is animatics. And the scripting is really about the visuals. So when you look at a script for a narrative, it's all like on a one-page 9.5 by 11 and goes across like a normal document would. For animation, we produce what's called a 2-column script, and on the left hand of the column it has the visuals, and on the right hand of the columns it has the audio, what you're going to be hearing. And so those visual columns on the left is generally a lot longer than the right, because again, we want the action to do the speaking for us and just have the voiceover fill in where it's necessary. From that, we'll usually make some storyboards to show what will some of those visuals look like. And once we get approval on those, we go into the animatic stage, which is a rough skeleton sketch of how the movement will go, the length of it, making sure those visuals actually convey what they're supposed to be conveying, and get the message across, and layer a scratch voiceover track over it to make sure that we're using the voiceover in the right place. If we started animating right away and we didn't have those elements, it would be a lot of work to go backwards, and honestly, there would be an imbalance between voiceover and visual.
Great, thanks, Stacy. I've got a question from Jeffrey. Jeffrey asks, is it realistic to produce a 3-minute video with an iPhone? Can you give some camera and audio recording recommendations in a few various price ranges? Hi guys, it sounds like we're having a little bit of audio issues. Stacy's going to jump on a different line, so that's taking just a moment. Bear with us for just 1 second.
About it is, what's the video you're trying to make? If you want to make a 3-minute video of someone at an event talking about what's going on or what they're seeing and show some images from the event, yes, you can make a 3-minute video with an iPhone. Again, it's all about those pre-production steps, going in with the tripod, finding locations that are quiet, iPhones are great for posting web video. If you're thinking about this video going to broadcast, or filming with a celebrity, I wouldn't use an iPhone. I would try to get a better camera. But an iPhone is great. There's a couple applications I'm happy to email them. I don't have the names off the top of my head, but there's some that help you read audio levels on the iPhone so you know if your audio is peaking. You can also get great attachments for the iPhone that have these lenses. They're not, Canon $2,000 lenses, but they are lenses that give you a wider picture and a longer picture, which means zoomed in without having to physically zoom in with your lens. Those attachments are great, and they're like $30. The downfall with the iPhone is the memory space. If you want to film an hour-long interview with someone, you might run out of it. You can get more memory for it, but then you have to swap it out. So yes, you can make, the short answer is yes, you can make a 3-minute video with an iPhone, but again, it comes down to what are your goals and what are you trying to do with the video.
Great, thanks, Stacy. And we're going to have time for one more question today. We have, I believe, two outstanding questions from Jeremy and AP. We're going to answer Chloe's question just before we close at the 10-minute mark. But Jeremy and AP, we'll email you after the webinar to follow up on those two. And I'm going to find Chloe's question really quickly. It is, what audio equipment do you recommend for someone using a Canon 5D Mark II camera and needing to take video and audio without others to help in the process? This would be used for things like interviews. So, Chloe, if we're reading your question right, it sounds like you're kind of doing the one-man band approach and won't have a lot of crew at your disposal, and it seems like you have a good idea of what camera you're working with, in this case the Canon 5D Mark II. Very specific.
It's a beautiful camera. I'm just going to cut you off.
All right. Stacey's going to jump in and do what she does on
this. Is a great, it's a great camera. It's beautiful for those of you who aren't familiar with it. It's a DSLR that captures video as well. This is a great point, and something that I probably should have actually brought up in the presentation is when you work with those DSLRs, even though they create great images, they have terrible audio, and I'm sure that's why this question is being asked. My recommendation is to get a Tascam recorder, and even though you're a one-man band, you can get a little holder that can attach to the back of the camera or your tripod, and the way I would record the audio is you use the audio function on the camera, which gives you a reference track of what you're picking up, and then record to the Tascam, send a lavalier into channel 1 and a boom or a shotgun microphone into channel 2. So you have 2 tracks to mix from. And the way you're going to sync those up is if you have Adobe Premiere, Premiere Elements, Avid, I want to say Sony Vegas, but don't quote me on that, or Final Cut, you can get a program, it's $50, called Pluralize. And when you bring in the audio from the Tascam and the audio on your image file, it will sync those up automatically. If you don't have the budget to invest in the software, another way to do it is by putting a clap at the beginning of the track, like that, and you can link them up in post-production. There's also a way where if you work with the Tascam recorder, you can send the audio back into the camera and record it straight onto the SD card, and it kind of like it jams it. It's tricky. I don't totally recommend it, but I can send you some of those specs. It's basically sending a line into a line out into a line in, back to a line in, and it's a special cable that you have to order from B&H Photo.
Okay, Stacy, thanks so much. So that's the last question we're going to get a chance to take today. We will be emailing follow-ups to anyone we didn't get a chance to get to. Just a quick reminder, we will be posting the recording of this session to YouTube, naturally, as a video here in a day or two, and we'll hopefully be able to email that out to everybody who joined us today. So again, no need to take copious notes, and you'll have that coming to share with your colleagues or to keep as a reference and a refresher on into the future. Again, please, I encourage everyone to join us for next week's session on distribution of video. Until then, please, by all means, if you learned something interesting here today, please tweet it out using hashtag IntoFocus, all one word. And of course, if you have any questions or follow-ups or would like help with your video work in-house or looking for a producer to create video content for your organization in the future, please keep C3 in mind. Thanks again for hanging in with us here. I know we went over our time today. We look forward to seeing you on the next webinar and out in the world. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you soon. Bye.